Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and we're going to have another incredible episode today. So I hope you guys are strapped in and ready to get all the incredible knowledge I'm going to deliver to you guys today. So obviously the big topic we're going to discuss at first is Roe v. Wade is no more. Now states can ban abortion if they so choose. Other states can still keep it legal if they so choose. That's simply what Roe v. Wade does, but some people think that it's now illegal throughout the country, and it's only going to probably be illegal in maybe a fourth or a third of the country. It's now up to the states to decide, not the federal government. There is no more a national mandate for every state to have abortion legal. Limitless abortion, essentially. And now we're going to see a very different America. So this is obviously dominating the news over the weekend. This is something we saw coming. I mean, when the leak happened in May, the draft of the majority opinion came out in May. People, were arguing over it and discussing it. Some people were worried that it was not going to be the actual majority opinion of the court, that they were going to actually change their opinion. It was going to be intimidated, but no, they stuck with it. And now we have states that can ban abortion, and some states have already gone about that. So I'm going to talk about a lot of people have discussed this, so I'm going to talk about three other issues with it, or that others are probably not going to discuss. I guess I'm saying three, but it might be more than that. It's a few other issues is a better way of saying it. The first thing is the political implications of this. Some people are convinced that it's actually going to hurt Republicans. Others are saying it's going to be a wash. No one is really saying that it's actually going to be a huge boost for Republicans. So it's either just going to be no big deal, it's not going to really hurt or hinder, or it's actually going to significantly hurt. I'm more on the side that it's going to ultimately be a wash. It's not going to really affect Republicans. It may do so in a few states, particularly battleground states or states where there's a large liberal population, or, that there are actually seats in contested, statewide elections. Like, it's not going to affect people in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, these very deep red states that choose to ban abortion. It's going to be more states like Georgia, Texas, Florida. I don't think North Carolina has a trigger law, and they have a Democratic governor, so it's probably not going to affect them. And maybe some of these Midwest battleground states, like, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, possibly even Ohio, where it'll become a political issue. And so I don't think it's going to have enough to transform what is set to be a red wave election, where it's set to be Republicans are going to gain massive victories in November. I don't think it has the potential to completely switch that to a Democrat wave, a blue wave, if you will, where Democrats are going to score massive victories on this. Because this is literally the only thing that they have to run on. Like, let's go over the list of things that they have. January 6th. No one gives a shit about January 6th anymore. Guns. Well, people do care about that, but it's not going to be an issue that they're going to go to the polls about, and that is outweighed by crime, and crime is Democrats are generally seen as soft on that, and Republicans, even though that terrible gun control bill should have never been passed, it does defang and neuter the issue. That the fact that Republicans passed this bill, they did something. They have to show that they did something, and Democrats really don't have the power to run on that. And third is abortion, which out of the three that I mentioned, it's probably the most viable of the issues that they could run on. But I don't think it's not going to have that powerful effect. I mean, when gas is up to $6 or $7 a gallon everywhere, when food prices are through the roof, when we're in the middle of a recession, and they're seeing all the stupid policies that Biden and the Democrats are doing. We have a border crisis. Hundreds of thousands of illegals are crossing the border every month. I think people are ultimately just going to forget it because it only pertains to a narrow group of people. And I don't think some people may oppose the decision. There is polling showing that, a majority of Americans say they oppose it, but is that going to actually sway their opinion at the voting booth? I don't really think so. I think they're going to ultimately vote. This is ultimately going to be an election determined by crime, the economy, especially the economy and inflation, the border crisis, crime, all these issues that Republicans are much stronger on than Democrats. And the only places it could really see the effect is where an election is within 1 or 2 points, and it could sway, that extra 1 or 2 point in the Democrats' direction. You may see this in Georgia. You may see this in Florida. Potentially, I think the main place is in Pennsylvania. I think, both the Republican candidates are, the polling so far is not showing them doing very well. With both Oz and Doug Mastriano. Doug Mastriano running for the governor and Dr. Oz running for Senate. And I think it may have an effect in states like that and also in Wisconsin and elsewhere where, the Democrats finally have an issue to run on and to show like, hey, look, Republicans are going to not only take away abortion, they're going to take away your birth control and et cetera, and all these terrible things. And maybe it might prove it may move that 1 point difference in Republicans' favor and then move that difference in Democrats' favor. So I think it will affect a few elections, but I still think Republicans are going to have a positive gain in November. I still think they're they look like poised that they're going to take the majority in the House. Maybe it may have the effect of ensuring that they don't gain the majority in the Senate. But I think even if Democrats did, it'd be a very narrow majority. It'd be like going from 50-50 to 51-49. Or Republicans that are supposed to have a bigger majority, and it's only 51-49 or 52-48 that they have there. It could have that effect, but I mean, Republicans have been promising to use the courts to repeal Roe v. Wade for ages. They've been promising that. Republican presidents have campaigned on that for years and years and years, and they finally deliver the policy victory to their constituents and the powerful lobbies within the Republican Party, and they delivered on that promise. They essentially, any time that they talked about Supreme Court justices or federal justices, they promised that we're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and they finally did it after 50 years. So is that worth maybe, not gaining, maybe 5 seats in the House or something, or maybe a Senate seat to gain this long-term policy goal that Republicans and conservatives have set out for? It's probably worth, I think most conservatives and Republicans would say it's worth it. So we'll have to see. I think it's almost, if this was a normal year where maybe the economy was not spiraling out of control, maybe there was not a huge crime problem and there wasn't a massive problem at the border, and there was also chaos in the global sphere and a totally senile president, I think this could prove to be the decisive factor in election. But there are so many other things going on that I don't think it's going to have the massive negative effect for Republicans that some people are predicting. So that is my thoughts on the political implications. And now turning aside to some of the other issues with it, particularly the left's response. I think you have never seen liberals Fed post harder than after this decision. Pretty much you had blue checks just like calling for assassinations and firebombing the Supreme Court after this election, and then demanding violence. There was I keep wanting to call him Obama, maybe because he tries to be Obama, but he is Biden. Joe Biden, our great president, delivered this like, we want people to protest in peace. We want peace in our time. And he's like trying to remember what he's saying. And when the tweets that are showing him delivering this are demand that everyone keep their protests peaceful, it got ratioed by all these blue checks saying, no, we need violence. We need to do more than, we can't just vote our way out of this. It's very much their Wignat mode. Wignats are always talking about, oh, just vote harder, mocking people for that. And now Democrats are just using Wignat rhetoric for that. Now, it could be just like standard Wignats where they're just like Fed posting on the internet and they're actually doing nothing. But there's been more aggressive protests. I mean, they tried to storm into the Arizona Capitol. They're having violent protests on the West Coast. And we've seen this massive wave of, vandalism and attacks. I think even a few firebombings against pregnancy centers generally these pregnancy centers are run by pro-life groups, and they're done in order to dissuade people from having abortions, and that's why they target them. There's also been some vandalism of churches and stuff. And as I've always been saying on the podcast, I think if, they actually did overturn Roe v. Wade, which they did, you would see that amped up. Now, does this go to the next step of, there's, dozens of church firebombed, or that there's assassination attempts on public officials. I don't know if it's going to go to that next step. I don't know if it's going to go to the next step. And I don't think that there were, I would have predicted that there were going to be more of those type of attacks, the type of vandalism and fire bombings of these pregnancies in churches following this decision. But that didn't really happen over the weekend. So maybe it is just going to be more of what we're seeing, more aggressive protests, more, people trying to block highways and interstates, and maybe trying to, interrupt church services and these type of things. I didn't see any stories about people trying to disrupt church services, which there were a few cases of that in May of where they were doing that, and they put on their handmaid tale costumes and they went out. So it just shows, I think there will be more response, but it might be just more of what we've been seeing and just at a greater extent. What is particularly interesting is how the left can just fed posts and call for terrorism and violence and even targeted assassinations, because people were demanding that for Clarence Thomas's and other Supreme Court justices. There were big accounts calling for his murder, and people were, and this is just tolerated. And there was one example where somebody reported somebody issuing an assassination threat against Clarence Thomas, and I believe his address was in the replies. And Twitter did not censor it. And you have to think about all the things that they censor the right over, and just the banal and benign things that they censor us over. And you can literally talk about terrorism and blowing people up, and there will be no consequences. And it's I have to insist that there are so many blue checks who are getting into veiled violent threats, or sometimes not so veiled violent threats. It was very explicit. And this is how they feel, that they know that they believe that they operate in this conservative theocracy that oppresses them and persecutes them, and they just have no freedom or anything anymore, and that they have to turn to violence because they live in a corrupt system. And while the system fully tolerates them engaging in violence, and you have to think about the response that happened when Brett Kavanaugh had an assassination attempt on his life. The entire blue check liberal media laughed about it and mocked it and said, thoughts and prayers. And they basically would have said the same thing if he had even been assassinated. And they would have been openly talking about how this benefits them. And so they don't really have a concern about appearing about optics. They don't need to worry about optics because they control the media. They operate the moral institutions that determine what's right and wrong. And if the moral institutions are telling you that the Supreme Court is now about to eliminate interracial marriage and gay marriage and all these other rights, which there is very little chance of this happening. I see a lot of conservatives talking about, I don't think conservatives are talking seriously about overturning Loving versus Virginia, but there are some conservatives who are believing that the court is going to overturn decisions, Obergefell, which allows for states to ban gay marriage, or even decisions that had, overturned laws outlawing homosexuality and sodomy, that they think the court is now going to take this on, and conservative states are once again going to ban gay marriage and homosexuality. I have some news for you. I don't think that's going to happen because no one is going to file these suits to actually overturn these cases, for one. Two, these red states, they do sound very, they're very strong on abortion, but when it comes to gay issues, outside of trans stuff, they have completely surrendered and no longer care about that stuff. It's just stuff that you just see on Twitter. You're not going to see the court overturn Obergefell. Even if that case did come up, Roberts would change his opinion, would probably vote to uphold the decision. And Gorsuch has openly said that he supports the decision as well, and we should keep it. And I think, Kavanaugh is probably not that reliable on that issue either. So I don't think that's going to happen. And Loving v. Virginia, this is probably the most outrageous, that liberals are they're absolutely going to get rid of Loving v. Virginia and then allow states to criminalize interracial marriage again. I'm what planet do you live on? There is zero chance of this happening. There is a greater chance of them outlawing homosexuality again than any state outlawing interracial marriage. They don't even point to any state that would push this law through. So it's just total fear-mongering that's not based in reality. It's saying that the courts are going to bring back the Nuremberg laws or something. I mean, they might as just well make up the most ridiculous things as possible. Like, they're going to put all women in concentration camps. It's like a legal expert. And there's like actual law professors who are saying this, like accredited, people you would think are highly respected, not highly respected by this show, and they're saying this ridiculous nonsense. But that's feeding this type of hysteria and violent response that the left has towards abortion, or towards the abortion verdict, and why they feel comfortable in arguing for fire bombings and assassinations, because the political process has failed. As I keep saying, they're going through their Wignat phase. So it's funny that all these blue check marks are going through this. And I have another example of the support for violent rhetoric if it's targeted at specific groups that it's okay to demand violence towards. There was a viral tweet that I responded to where a bunch of leftists were retweeting it. It got nearly 40,000 likes, and it was a dude who murdering his landlord. Now the landlord, was an elderly man. He was in his 70s. He had actually done a solid for his tenant. He had lowered his rent from $400 to $200, and I believe this happened in New York City. That's a very affordable rent there at $200, and he lowered it from $400 to $200 because he realized the guy wasn't paying. But the guy hadn't paid for 3 months, and then he went and asked for his rent, and the guy kicked him down the stairs, and it killed him. And all the leftoids were talk about how base this is, and they've really stolen our language when you see all the comments going like, this is based, take that, landlord scums, this isn't humans, this is pest control. And you saw so many of these people engaging this rhetoric. And when I responded to it, I saw Will Menaker, who's like one of the co-hosts of Chapo Trap House. I assume most of my listeners know what Chapo Trap House is, so I'm not going to even explain that. And I saw, I tweeted out him a screenshot of him tweeting it, and then all these irony leftists began attacking me. One guy, Jesus de Super Jew, who likes to imitate other users. He's done James Lindsay. He's now imitating Kyle Rittenhouse. And he is like, oh, it'd be more likes if it had been you. Whoa, great. Great. The Norwood left is upset at me. And so I was getting attacked and ratioed for saying that like a murderer is wrong. Because with landlords, they all believe that you should be able to kill them because they, for the audacity of demanding rent money. It's like they should give you free rent. You shouldn't have to pay rent. And with the landlord situation, before I go on to talking about the violent situation, it really just proves they like the dirtbag left and the irony left. They really just want to live as teenagers for their entire lives. They don't want to work. They're all anti-work. They don't want to pay rent. They want to live free at home with their parents, or now with their landlord. Their landlord just gives them money and pays them rent. They don't really want to be a productive member of society, and they just want to sit on a couch, smoke weed, and play video games all day. And this is the highest aspiration for them. This is the civilization they want. And it really is consumer communism that they want. And it's simply that you don't pay for anything. Weed is free. Video games are free. Rent is free. And there is no expectation for you to try to grow up and have a job. You can just like sit there and pretend to be 14 years old for your entire life. And many of these guys do look like teenagers. They look like guys in their late 20s and 30s who are still trying to imitate teenage looks. Like they still have hairstyles and clothing styles that you really would see more, that are more appropriate for a 16-year-old than like a dude in his 30s. They are like receding hair, but they're trying to have long, greasy hair that's unkempt. And this is their style. They're also like very delusional too. I know this is a little bit of a side. I had all these guys who like unironically, they are irony leftists, but they were unironically stating how they are badasses and really good looking and stuff. And then they send their pictures and they got like really thin necks, aren't intimidating at all. I would not say that they're particularly good looking. Like a lot of them look like homeless people, and they're like, I am extremely good looking. And it's not like said with irony, it's said with full confidence. And so this is how kind of they all think. There's like a thing with like all political factions that they all think that they're like badass and extremely good looking based on their politics. And being a part of the most mentally ill, messed up political faction. These guys all think that they're Giga Chads, and then they show their picture, and it's like some weird dude, racially ambiguous dude who looks like a homeless person, bad style, and they once again look like a 17-year-old trying to look cool, and because this is their eternal mindset. And this is what they go for. And it's also funny that a lot of these guys have criminal records when it comes out. I mean, it's really part of this lumpen bourgeoisie that we now have. And these were all the guys that attacked Kyle Rittenhouse. These were dudes that you wouldn't really think of them as the hardened criminal class. These aren't dudes that are going to federal prison that they have prison tats and they're intimidating guys. They're kind of just these petty criminals that are just going in and out of county jail for DUIs and petty theft. And they're leftists and mad at the world because they're idiots and can't get their situation straight. And they should have been having a standard middle class job, but due to them their eternal teenage rebellion, they're unable to grow up. And so this is how they operate now. And it's one of the guys attacked Rittenhouse with a fucking skateboard. And it's bro, you're in your late 20s. Why the fuck are you skateboarding? And this is their mentality. It's a 40-year-old who's fully Norwood, but he still has long hair with his ball with on the sides, and he's rolling he's on a skateboard and going to his pot dealer. This is the left-wing mindset that they have, and this is what they're all going towards. And when it comes to their landlord and violence, they really hate landlords because this is their new parent. The parents have pushed them out, and now their new parent is their landlord who demands their parents would demand they get a job and grow up, and now the landlord just demands that they pay rent. And it's no, fuck you, landlord, I'm gonna kick you down. And generally these people aren't dealing with the real scummy slumlords. They're dealing with a corporate renter, firm that is running their apartment. And likely, it's they, they have the set process. If you don't pay rent in 5 days, they put a late fee on you. But it's not the type of scummy behavior I guess you would see with a real slumlord. And these guys really get into that. But that's a particular group though with it. And now it's you could direct violence against Karens, against white people in general, but particularly hateful expressions of whites. So Karens, especially if you ever see, it's oh, she's calling the police on a black barbecue, you should have the right to shoot her. That's a type of comfortable targets they're okay with encouraging violence against, and they feel free to Fed post on. But ultimately, these groups, they don't actually threaten the power system when they are encouraging acts of violence. Because they're not calling acts of violence against, surprisingly against billionaires or against, the federal government or the federal government proper, the institutions of it, particular officials maybe. They're not calling for that. Maybe they'll attack Border Patrol and ICE, which the left, the left cultural centers hate as well. They really go after the comfortable, the appropriate targets, the safe targets that the general leftist elite share in their hatred and say you must go after. So Border Patrol is fine to hate on. ICE is fine to hate on. FBI, no, you can't hate on them. CIA, they like to blame the CIA for everything, but they still direct most of their ire towards local law enforcement and Border Patrol. So local police, Karens, white people in general, landlords. These are the types of groups that they can go after. Angry customers at their at some restaurant because they're all service workers. They really also demand violence against them. But any type of real expression of power, and of course right-wing extremists, that's their main target for all these things. But any group that actually has power in society and is actually in control of what happens in this country, they don't really want to target it unless they're Supreme Court justices or Republicans. But those are safe targets because, once again, all these blue checks are encouraging violence and hatred and harassment towards them. So they never go against the normal liberal elite confines, and they're able to operate in that. And that's how they're able to live out their 16-year-old dream of never growing up and smoking weed and playing video games and not having a real job. And the system is fine with that, and it's okay with them going along with that as long as they keep within touch. But there is like a massive growth in the lumpen bourgeoisie. I think you've seen this with like drug abuse spiking. It really is one of the most remarkable features of American life now is how prevalent drug use is. If you go into most cities, you will smell weed at some point. And it's also even common in apartment complexes, no matter where you live. I've talked to many people throughout this country, and pretty much it's agreed upon that a lot of apartment complexes now smell like weed. Maybe not 24/7, but on a pretty regular basis. And just like the permissiveness around it, like there are so many people who, even on Twitter and stuff, who will openly tout their cocaine use and their other use of party drugs. And it's also coming at a time where a lot of these drugs are getting mixed with fentanyl, which may kill you, even if it's a drug that you would otherwise not suspect of trying to kill you. There are many cases of this happening, but we've pretty much ended the war on drugs a lot of respects, and we no longer want to care about the war on drugs, and now we're just having drug abuse spike, and they've been telling us like, oh, the drug war made it worse, and now we're like pretty much ended it. No one cares about weed anymore, or drug, and even minor drug possession, and now we're just seeing people just like drug abuse like spike, and like everyone's on drugs. And from everything from weed, pills, heroin, cocaine, it's like this whole country is drugged up. And instead of a war on drugs, we're just going to be more permissive about it. And I see this when like there's like people who have overdose deaths, and there's never like a call to like, we need to get rid of these drugs. We need to make people doing drugs safer and more effective. It's like, oh, they need safer needles, and they need to make sure there's no fentanyl in their drugs. And the lumpen bourgeoisie is a huge into drugs. I mean, just from weed into pills onward, and that's just a part of the culture permissiveness in our society. You really have to look down, and if you're like seeing this like crime rise from everything from carjackings to murder, and just like going around and seeing people like fight more, and there's like a real degradation in norms and standards in America, and drug use spiking. It's just a culture permissiveness that's taken over our country, where let people enjoy things is now taken to the nth degree, and it's even like if you step on a shoe, I have to shoot you. And as long as you're not a white guy with a political motive doing a mass shooting, it's okay. It's just something we have to live with. And so the real problem with the crime is that we put away criminals, not that criminals commit crime. And that's now the new standard and dogma among our society. And it'll be interesting to see if there's actually a backlash, as we saw in the 80s and 90s, towards a permissiveness towards crime and drug use comes about in our nation. But I mean, right now it's just like anything goes. Except for racism and sexism and homophobia. We need a war on racism, not a war on drugs. And I think a lot of people would agree to that. So that's enough criticism on the left. I now need to move on to the other topic, which was offering some light criticism of the right, which will then blend into another topic that I love discussing. And I think the right's taken a rightful rightful, I'm using right a lot, has taken it's taken a victory lap on this, well-deserved victory lap. But there are some suggestions that are coming out of this that I think are really stupid. And one thing is that I'm seeing this wholesome Chungus socialism being proposed by these guys. These like wholesome Chungus populism. And it's like, what we need now is more tax credits and family subsidies and all these things that now are going to ensure that these women can carry their kids and take care of them. And this is coming from a good place. Like, I think this is a noble motive. We have to think about what this is actually entails. And what is actually happening here. First off, people who are married are not the ones having abortions. Let's get that clear. That's very small minority. It is primarily single women who are getting abortions. It is not like a happy middle class white family who they're like, oh no, I work at a big corporation and they're demanding I get an abortion. I was seeing these takes too. It's like, these companies don't offer maternity leave, but they are going to pay for you to go to another state to kill your child and stuff. And it's like, most of the companies that are saying this, especially the big corporations, are offering maternity leave as well. The companies that don't offer maternity leave are generally small businesses that can't afford it. But most of the giant corporations can't afford maternity leave. They offer that. All the libtards love it. It is what it is. It's not. It's actually not. And as you can see, even in Europe, which I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics here, so it's going to be bouncing around a little bit. Maybe lose the train of thought, but follow along. In Europe, let me go back a little bit. A lot of these American conservatives, when they talk about these family subsidies and these generous benefits and stuff, they'll look to Europe and say, Europe offers this. And they say, we need this in order to increase our fertility rate. But the one thing is that in Europe, they have extremely generous family benefits, maternity leave, paternity leave, all those things. And yet, their fertility rate in many of these countries is lower than America's. It's not spurring the type, and even if their fertility rate may be higher than America, it's not anywhere near it's not replacement level. It's not 2.1 births or however they say it. You know what I'm saying? And it's not near replacement level. So so even with these benefits, we're not going to see a fertility boost. And when they say this now, you could say, well, who cares about fertility boosts? We should just reward parents for, having children and families. And that I agree with that case. We already have some tax credits and other things that are reward families and maybe increasing it a little bit. But operating under a current regime, any of these type of benefits would be used to subsidize groups that can claim victim status or minority or oppressed status. It'd be, subsidies for gay couples to have a surrogate mother. Republicans would definitely oppose that, but that would be the type of things the left would support. Support for single moms and for women of color. Those are the type of benefits that would generally be accrued by these things. Very few of these things would be encouraging middle class married families to have more children. You would not see that coming from these family tax credits. And a lot of conservatives want this, through means testing or insisting that it must be married. That's just not going to pass through. And also conservatives are wanting to say they have to be married to have these benefits. Yet a lot of conservatives are also talking about how awesome single moms are and how we need more stepdads and these things. And so they don't necessarily want the single moms to stay single. They really want a dad to step up. There was this viral tweet that was a green text reposter. It was like something from 4chan. And it was not a very 4chan-esque post. It was talking about, it's likely a made-up story. It was about this guy who's fat, who runs a pizza shop, I guess in a small town. And he helps out some kid, and then he meets the mom, and then the mom and him start going on dates. And now, he was alone and not, having any success with women, but now he has a wife and kids of his own, and they're not kids of his own. He's a stepdad, and the wife told him I was married to a drug addict, or had him with a drug addict, but he left me, and now I'm alone. And that's such a sad story. And then all these conservatives this is awesome, I love this. And it's the height of family planning now, or family, is that you marry a divorcee of a drug addict who had 2 kids with him, and then you raise the drug addict's kids as your own. And some cases that's fine. I mean, not necessarily hating on all stepdads or in those situations. I mean, there's some weird situations that arise and people divorce for a variety of reasons. But, celebrating the idea of you marrying a woman who was not wise enough to, decide not to marry a drug addict and have kids with him. I think, there should be some, standards I think maybe there's some red flags here that you shouldn't be celebrating with this poor guy who does this. So conservatives really love that. Anytime they hear a stepdad story, it's I'm the dad who stepped up. They yes, this is it. This is family. And they always like to view single women as women without agency who are preyed upon by evil men. And they need a good man to step up and take care of them. Maybe in some cases that's true, and sometimes it may be not their fault, but if they're retweeting if they're retweeting this and thinking that it's awesome that, the story about the fat pizza shop owner who's becoming a stepdad to a drug addict's kids, maybe this is going a little bit too far. Maybe we should reconsider these things. So even with that, when they're demanding that it has to be a married couple, their own retweet preferences show that that's not the case. That they want to help out single moms as much as it. So a lot of what these family tax credits and subsidies would do is it would just subsidize the people we're already subsidizing and encourage people that maybe as a society we don't want them to have. Or where we want them to have fewer kids, and the people that we want to have more kids, we're not going to subsidize, but the people who are having, single moms and dysfunctional scenarios, drug addicts, welfare cases, we're going to be giving them more money, while the standard middle class white family is not going to get anything from these tax credits to encourage them to have children. And even if they did have these generous benefits, as shown by Europe, it really doesn't show that it has a fertility boost. There are other cultural factors that are happening there. It's not It's not entirely economic. It's not simply because, I don't have a tax credit to have another child or a child, and thus I'm not gonna or generous enough tax credit, so I'm just not gonna do this. And as seen, Hungary's has a little bit of success with that. But I also have to remind you that Europe is a very different demographic situation than America. Most of these countries, especially like Hungary, they're 90%, 95% homogenous, especially in Eastern Europe. Even in Western Europe, there's still, the core historic population is still at least 80% of the population in a lot of these countries, even in a place like Germany and the Scandinavia. And so it's a very different situation here where the population is not the historic population of America. And what happens with the demographic, and people are always talking about maybe great replacement and these demographic changes and stuff, and really all these family tax policies and credits would just accelerate those trends rather than stifle them or change them in a direction where the historic population is having more children. I don't think that's how the government's going to work. And I also don't think it's one thing is that a lot of the right, is adopting this type of socialism of base when it alienates our actual base, which is generally middle-class whites who feel that they're taxed too much to pay for everyone else's goodies. They feel that they pay for welfare too much to subsidize people who won't work, and they subsidize, welfare moms to have more children. They get very upset about this, and they're like, I have to pay all these damn taxes. I don't want to pay more. But then the right is like, no, we need you to pay more taxes because we've invented a fantasy demographic as our core base. And it's the new base, according to a lot of right-wing Twitter, new right, populist Inc., whatever you want to call it, even some people on the distant right, is that our core base are working class whites who are at the near point of poverty. These people would starve to death unless we give them government subsidies. And we have to give them government subsidies. And this is at the same time that we're thinking that the working class whites are need more socialism in order to survive because they're so hard put. But at the same time, we're encouraging middle class kids to drop out of college and go become members of the working class through trade school because they'll make more money than the white collar workers. But at the same time, we're saying that these blue collar workers who are out in rural America, who are self-sufficient, independent, making tons of money, are also at the same time at the point of starvation unless we do base socialism to help them out. And working class whites are a part of our base, but they also share a lot of the same concerns as the work of middle class whites. These are not the people on welfare. These are not the people who are enjoying stuff at the public trough. They are not they're not the beneficiaries of the generous benefits the government offers to welfare moms and others. They're generally working and feeling that they're paying too much taxes as is, and they do not feel like they need to pay more taxes to subsidize a fantasy demographic that they're supposedly a part of, but it's really going to go to the multiracial working class, and emphasis on multiracial because it's not really going to go much towards whites. And that's generally what these policies come out to. And it's all of these family stuff. So I actually think that, the pro-family stuff, it comes from a right place, and, it is addressing a real problem, but it doesn't look at America as it exists today. It imagines America as it was in the 1950s, and even the class elements and how people are surviving and who the real demographics that the GOP is reaching. and with Trump and national populism, it doesn't fully address this. It just imagines a fantasy demographic as our own, as like this multiracial working class that is both really wealthy, but at the same time in need of a base socialism. How that works, I don't know, but you'll figure it out through somehow. The fact is, the base doesn't necessarily like big government. I mean, this has always been the case. Yeah, you used to mock conservative Inc. for being obsessed with big government and avoiding, immigration and demographic issues and other things like that. But, and so people would signal against big government to say that they actually are signal against the obsession with it to say that they get the real issues. But now people have just taken that too far and they forget the real issues and are arguing for policies that would make those real issues even worse from our perspective, while demanding for big government, which the base doesn't want. They do not want to pay more taxes. They do not want to have more interference from their lives from the nanny state. They especially do not want to subsidize poor families to have more kids, while even if they were offered subsidies, they still would not be able to have, they would not have any more children that they already have. And even with, most of the companies that they work for now have maternity leave and generous benefits for when they have children. That's still not encouraging the fertility rate to go up as much as we think it should. I am noticing a real gap between what the online right, and this is not just dissident right, this goes even into conservative Inc. and mainstream right tweeter people, I like that term, and what the ordinary right-wing voter Republican actually cares about. Sometimes this is used to signal against the extremely online right-wingers who just don't know ordinary Americans. They like watching football and stuff, and it's like normie pill. Like, there's some people who are so obsessed with the normie masses that they then pretend the normie masses have their beliefs and then they just worship them, which I'll get to that in a moment. And then there are those who think that their positions are are same page. They think that this is what the normie masses are caring about, and that's not the case. Like, the things that we were talking about and suggesting, they would alienate our own base, from going for supporting big government to supporting base socialism to wanting to attempt to impose an integralist state, and even the issues that they seem to care about. I mean, conservative Inc. is really, really focused on abortion. They think that it's one of the main issues for the base. Generally, the base is very pro-life. I think that they do care. They're not pro-abortion, but it's not an issue that they care much about. And anytime they look at polls, and this is one reason that I think it's not going to affect population, is that when you ever look at polls, abortion always ranks near the bottom of top concerns. It's not a major concern to them, but even if you looked at conservative Inc. Twitter, or even in some just online right Twitter, you would think that it's their number one concern, which it's not. And so you just have this wide gap between what ordinary people are and what the online right is getting into. And the online right is trying to even attempt to recreate a new religious right and being led by people who are not particularly religious. Like somebody like James Lindsay, who's like an open atheist, but is talking about the evils of demons and stuff. And you just see all these other people, are they like secular Jews, or just like people who are never going to church. And now we have a new religious right that's about saying off the wall, aggressive things to get a lot of retweets and likes, but it's not actually led by religious leaders who are even people who are attending church on a regular basis. And even with the average Republican voter, if you look at the trends among Republicans, is evangelicals are still a strong part of the base and still, are responsible for get out the vote efforts and really are a strong, reliable core of the Republican Party. But if you even look at Republican voters, even among evangelicals, church attendance is going down. There is a greater tolerance for gay issues. I'm not saying these are good things. This is just what I'm pointing out. And these are not people who are demanding that we ban gay marriage and that we outlaw homosexuality. I mean, once again, this is not like a judgment of this. This is what I'm just saying as the ordinary Republicans and how they view these things. They do hate political correctness. They do hate woke stuff. They hate critical race theory. I mean, critical race theory, if you want to look at social cultural issues that actually do transform elections. I mean, Glenn Youngkin is governor of Virginia now due to critical race theory and campaigning on it. That is something that people worked up. It's not, and it was not even pro-life issues at all. Youngkin didn't even mention abortion. He refused to talk about abortion on the campaign trail because he's worried that he'd alienate some suburbanites with it. So it's a very different type of concerns from what you see. I mean, even though the people on Twitter are very anti-political correctness, very anti-critical race theory and everything, but they add in a lot of other things that ordinary, Republicans don't care about. And there's been a lot of discussion over the concept of barstool conservative. And I don't really like this concept too much because, once again, it is implying that a lot of conservatives are sports simps, which they are. They like to prove this time and time again. I'm going to get into this with a cognitive elite question later on. So I'll wait for that moment. But going along with this, on what barstool conservatives are about, it is generally they're more socially liberal than our Republicans were 20 years ago. They're not necessarily that worked up about stuff that animated the religious right, but they're very anti-political correctness. They're very concerned with stuff with racial indoctrination, and they're very much concerned with, and also they're also very, when it was described by Matthew Walther in his piece, which there are some issues with it, he described them as ultimately libertarianish, but not fully committed to it, as they will support like the government intervening to stop text censorship and these things. And I think the general description of barstool conservatism is probably closer to what the base is now, or what the average Republican voter is now, than the type of right-wing focus you see on Twitter for both Conservative Inc. and down to the distant right. Sometimes the expressions of it on the online right are closer to that. And this is not a judgment either. I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that this is what the average Republican voter is like. And I'm also not saying that they're like Dave Portnoy and the other Barstool guys. I think most of them, Dave Portnoy saying that abortion, he's now a single issue voter and stuff. I think a lot of the average Republicans like, no, I'm still voting Republican. And a lot of these people are still probably lean towards pro-life, I would say. But it's not like a major concern to them. It's not a major issue to them. These are people who are not, if you talk to them about demons and demonic possession, which a lot of people on Twitter like to talk about, even conservative people like to talk about this, they think you're crazy. They're not eager for a new religious right. They would certainly not be down for integralism or whatever have you. They're not adopting, becoming fervently religious. It is a phenomenon that we see much more among average Republicans now. It's like it's anti-political correctness, but in some respects it's more socially liberal than conservatism of the past. But they still have largely the same economic views. These are not people who are wanting base socialism. They already feel that they're paying too much in taxes and that they're tired of the government telling them what to do. This has always been a universal conservative aspect at least in American politics and in America, and generally of the core demographic. And they're not these people who are demanding base socialism, and they want somebody who's going to make sure that they're paying less taxes and has the government off their back, not somebody who's going to make them pay more taxes to subsidize other people's kids and has the government interfere with their life. They don't want any bureaucrats there. And by the way, this is like a smart move because generally any bureaucrats that are going to be involved in our society are going to be liberals. And so we should be, yes, I know this is like standard conning stuff and it was like stuff we were railing against 2016, but like shrinking the size of government and ensuring that it's like not interfering with people in your day-to-day life and lowering taxes and stuff, it's like a good thing because generally our government doesn't spend its money wisely as is, so there's no reason that we should be giving it more money. But we should not go full libertarian. We should still protect entitlements and ensure that and not completely eliminate this system of government. But you do really have to reduce the scope and expansion of the administrative state, and that is done, and lowering taxes and wiping away a lot of this bureaucracy is one aspect to that. And I think a lot of these Barstool conservatives are into that. They're not necessarily into the religious right, but based socialism and led by people who are not particularly religious that you see on the online right. All right, when I'm saying this on the online right, I'm seeing this as generally more mainstream right, the new right populist types who are into this stuff. Now on to my last topic before we get to the cognitive elite questions, and this is a favorite topic of mine. Now we're going to talk about good men scarcity. I know you guys like to hear about this. Good men scarcity that happens because there was a new study put out, or it wasn't even a study, it's just like an article put out by one of these family groups, conservative family groups. The group's called Institute for Family Studies, and they put out a blog called Where Have All the Good Men Gone? I ask that on a regular basis, as you guys know. And they interview these girls at the University of Virginia, elite school. They should be meeting elite men, and they're all complaining about how all the men suck and they can't find a good mate at the University of Virginia. Now, sometimes some of the girls are making adequate criticism. They're saying that none of these men want to commit and they can't find a man who wants a serious relationship. And then they interview other girls who are just like, these guys are just not good enough for me. They're just like, one girl says, I would say the quality of guys I generally come across are not necessarily guys I would date. And she's like, the girls seem to be driven and just focus on economics and a little more serious about it than the guys. And they say all the same things, that the girls are more committed to their work and whatever, and the guys are in a prolonged adolescence. And even they're trying to claim that the males at the University of Virginia are, these type of loser guys who are just playing video games who have no ambition, which, like, if a guy gets into the University of Virginia as like a high school student, that shows he's like more like got his shit together more than the average male. Like, this is not like a community college student who can't turn in homework. This is some guy who had the grades and the SAT to get into the University of Virginia and probably had a lot of extracurricular activities too. These are probably like the best men you could hope for the standards that these women are setting. Like, I want a guy who's ambitious, who works hard, who's smart, and like is not a drug addict and not like just a loser. And you're more likely to find this at elite schools, but these women still say like, there's no good enough guys for me. Where are all the good men? And then they point out there's some also valid stuff saying that like the gender imbalance at universities is going to 60% female, 40% male, and all these men are getting left behind. And then these women are saying that like they can't find a good man to date, which there's like two criticisms. The one criticism about like not finding a man who's willing to commit is probably more true because there's a lopsided imbalance between men and female, and the men have more of the advantage. So a lot of these guys, they're in their early 20s, they're not going to have this much freedom again. They don't want to be tied down by the old ball and chain. So they're having a good time in college. It's always happened. I don't think this is the worst thing in the world. And even when I was like in college, I remember guys who would just like get a girlfriend and they completely disappear. They'd already become like a beaten wife guy at the age of 20 or 21. And it's like, why do you want to like give up the height of your freedom just to be what you're going to experience for the rest of your life? So I don't know why guys do that. And that's what a lot of these women want to do, unfortunately. And so that's like the valid criticism that they can't find a guy to commit. But then there are girls that are like just saying like, there's no guy good enough for me. And I was like, you're at UVA. It's probably because you have inflated standards that you think that like you deserve Henry Cavill, who's at UVA, who just really wants to date a frumpy, boring girl who's willing to talk to the Institute for Family Studies for their good men study. Maybe you're just not worthy of the men you think that you should date, which never figures into any of these articles that conservatives write. They never talk about the decline in women. Where are all the good women? We need that. Why don't we answer this question? I mean, and obesity rates are increasing at a much higher rate among young women than it is for men. Also, mental illness is increasing at a much higher rate for women than men, and binge drinking is increasing at a much higher rate for women than for young men. And all these factors, you go in and you're just like, for a guy, it's like, if you're a guy and you're, and in college, you're probably at your prime of your, dating experience, you generally have more of the advantages than women. and this is going to be probably some of the last years of your freedom. You know, you don't have a real job, you don't have real responsibilities. You know, you have a whole lifetime to deal with the old ball and chain. Why not have some fun and enjoy your freedom? And I think that's like one thing. But all these women think that they need to neuter men at the earliest stage and get them to wife them up. No, it's probably better for society if colleges were being used more for, you know, ensuring that these people have serious relationships and commit and have marriages. But, you know, society is very different now than it was, you know, back in the 50s when women were just going to college to get their MRS degree. These women who are expecting to find their husband there still expect to have a career and go to a job and work, and maybe they're going to get a job in another location from their serious boyfriend or this, that, and they're going to have to deal with these situations. It's very different from the situation in the 50s and 60s where generally the woman would, you know, after college, they marry, they have kids. You know, maybe the woman has like a part-time job or something, but she's not really that caring about her career. She cares more about her MRS degree. And here they're expecting to be married and have their career. They want their husband and their career, but that's going to, you know, the career aspect may conflict with the husband's career. And, you know, that may not lead to the serious relationship that they're going to have. But they still have the expectation of the older generation, but it's now just with they're going to have a career, even though that career may jeopardize that relationship they've built. And rarely do conservatives, I mean, some people on the online right advocate for women not having careers, but Con Inc. is not into that. And also all these conservative femcells like, I have a career, you know, working at the Heritage Foundation staffer, so this is my career. I would not give that up for a man. And so they all get into this stuff. So they want to combine those aspirations with family aspirations. And, you know, there is a conflict there. There is a certain conflict there. It's going to be very hard for you to have, you know, your dream trad life as you're having a full-time white-collar job. But people all advocate for that. And it's like, where are all the good men? And it's like, well, you know, maybe they're disappearing because you're eating too many cupcakes. You know, I don't know what these people think that they're going to have. There is this sense of entitlement that comes from a lot of these women that they do expect that they should have this like incredible man as like Henry Cavill or something like that, or Matthew McConaughey, younger Matthew McConaughey, maybe not a man who's in his 50s. And this is really what they deserve and expect. And if something falls short of that, it's the fault of society. It's very much more the incel mindset that a lot of the liberals like to attack. But you see this much more part of the femcel mentality, because everyone makes fun of incels for being like losers, ugly losers who obviously don't deserve a pretty woman. But when you see this from like some frumpy 4 or 5 who, you know, has a terrible personality, doesn't really, you know, show herself to have a high market value to get the type of man she deserves or expects to have, you know, the entire society, and especially conservatives, like fall at their knees and like, I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. We really have to change society. We have to end hookup culture in order that you have like the man of your dreams. And so they go along with this. And, you know, one funny thing is, like, I was seeing a bunch of conservatives, young conservative pundits who are like attacking, Barstool Sports for promoting hookup culture. And I was like seeing some of these people like, I know you're a participant in hookup culture. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, and so some of these people, it's like, even with conservative standards of what they say that they want are very different from what they actually do. And they participate in all this stuff too. And, you know, in some ways you would expect that, like, maybe it would be good for society that hookup culture is not as prevalent. I mean, premarital sex, believe it or not, premarital sex existed before the 1960s. I think some conservatives forget that. It was definitely not at the scale that we see now, and it wasn't just like everyone engaging in it, but it still existed pre-1960s, and it was a little bit more, you know, people were having a little bit more of it than I think people expect. I mean, there is like this idea that some people, or a lot of conservatives and right-wingers, think that like prior to 1960, people had never heard of having sex outside of marriage. And like, if you read history, you'll have that opinion changed. Regardless, it is a problem, I think, but it's not. It's responding to how society interacts with now, and it is a two-way street. It is also women participating in it. They're not just like victims who are being brainwashed into this by evil men. They're participating in this as well. There. A lot of them are enjoying freedom and fun as much as the guys, probably more so than the guys. And this is not going to be solved by browbeating men. And I have to say, this is the real key here. There's all these arguments talking about hookup culture and the decline in good men and all this. It's all about browbeating men, young men who are already getting browbeaten by society. I mean, they're already falling behind. There's not much, even if you look at teen and youth culture, it is predominantly female oriented. If you look at the messages that are being delivered about self-esteem and what's important in society, it's primarily directed towards young women. And, a lot of these guys, maybe they don't have the best sense of direction. They're maybe falling behind for a lot of other reasons. And even in elementary school, a lot of young boys just want to go and run around and play, and school forces them to sit still and not do that. And then they're just like, oh, the girls are so much better behaved because, well, young boys just want to run around and play on the playground, not sit and learn boring shit all day. And conservatives will go on about like the war on boys and this stuff. But then when it comes to where are all the good men and they're falling behind, it then becomes browbeating men. It's like they need to be more ambitious. Like, why are they such losers? Stop playing video games, stop looking at porn, and start looking at my frumpy ass. And that's like what women are demanding from these men. And that they want so it's like all this stuff is about like just further cucking men and browbeating them and just forcing them to marry whatever the first woman that they come across, and that this is epic and awesome, and that they can be, going back to this to the pizza store stepdad. They're like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like you should want to marry a divorcee or single mom who had 2 kids with a drug addict, and that this should be the height of your aspirations. Is just whatever crumb comes your way, you should get on all fours to gobble it up and be like, thank you, I'm so glad that this is happening, and that you should never even think about doing hookup culture. And when women do hookup culture, they're a victim of evil men and evil society. But when men do it, they're the evil doers. They're the ones who need to be lectured and shamed for their behavior. And maybe they do to a certain extent. I think probably Dave Portnoy, he's a man in his 40s. Maybe we really should not honor and respect men in their 40s who are still living like a single bachelor lifestyle. I think he might even be close to 50 now, who are like living that lifestyle. I mean, you really should be like encouraging them to like settle down, have kids, be a family man. But at the same time, if you want them to be family men, you have to have good women who want them to settle down, who want them to, have that family life and to be a provider that all these women expect that their man should be. But it's an unequal deal here. It's like these women change nothing about themselves. They don't learn how to cook. They don't learn how to exercise. They don't stop eating sugar cookies. They don't even, and they make sure that they're nagging you all the time. And the guy instead is making sure he has a 6-figure career, is working out all the time, is building his whole life around a woman and nothing else. He's ditching his friends his wife doesn't like. And he's doing all this just so he can prove he's a good man to a frumpy 5. And guys are really lowering the standards, I think. It's like some guys are just maybe so desperate. Like I keep seeing around the city, and I keep seeing it in various areas. And generally these are not areas where are working class or downscale. They're like areas where you think you'd see a ton of healthy, good-looking young white people. And I'm seeing a bunch of guys that are a bunch of couples where it's like a fit guy who looks like he could, have a really good-looking girlfriend, and then his girlfriend is getting very chubby. Sometimes a little too chubby. And sometimes it's just a little like overweight, like maybe she could lose it. Sometimes it's like, whoa, there's no way going back from that. And I see that a lot more now. And I think, so guys are settling and trying to be the good men, but even then, it's still these women think that they deserve more. So just a rant there. I think in a lot of these ways, it is about just further neutering men and further browbeating them for not marrying the first woman that comes across their way, and that this problem is down to men playing too many video games and are being on dating apps. That's always my favorite, is like when they criticize them for being on dating apps. Like, where else are they going to meet women? It's like maybe they're trying to be a good man and find a girlfriend and somebody that they want to marry, but that's even bad, because they should be approaching these women at conservative functionaries or at church. They should not even be thinking about approaching women on dating apps. And even they've sometimes said that men shouldn't be on social media. I went off on an article, I think it was American Conservative, early last year, about some woman complaining that all men should be off of dating apps, and really what their whole focus needs to be on dating apps and social media, and that what they need to be doing is approaching this particular girl at bars and being this incredible man that she may consider going on a date with. And the author of the article was nothing to write home about, to put it nicely. So on this particular subject, I mean, conservatives are just, you really shouldn't listen to, because it really does not address like the real issues with men. It doesn't make them, and none of their topics or arguments are talking about how we need more good women. That's a real thing. We need more good women. Stop worrying about the decline in good men, and we need to worry about the decline in good women when they're all becoming obese and overweight and adopting terrible personalities, and they're all getting worked up into horrible left-wing issues. Like, women are far more into, especially young women, are far more into a trendy leftism and the new fads. Like, you have to remember, it's like pretty much every white woman in America, with a few exceptions, had a black square on their Instagram. And this is going after George Floyd's death and during the Black Lives Matter riots. And you see all these women engage in this, indulge in this behavior, that it makes them not really valuable women that you want to marry. And when we look at this, none of the conservatives want to blame, or want to say, where are all the good women? Because they still believe that all the young women out there are just perfect little angels, not participating in hookup culture, who are just, the incredible women that any man would die to have, and it's all the men's fault. When really, it's not saying all the men are perfect, but I think that it's a two-way street here. And I think you can't really just say where are all the good men, and then just without asking where are all the good women. And conservatives don't want to ask that, because simping is a core principle of conservative Inc. It is always with them. You can even see this with the abortion laws, which they all deny that these women have the agency to go to a doctor and say, kill my fetus, or to get rid of my fetus. And they all believe that this is not the woman's fault. It's all the evil men, abortionists, who are manipulating them, that they have no agency here. It's like pretending that a woman going to a hitman to kill her husband, it's all the hitman's fault. The woman is completely blameless. She's a victim too. That's the same way that conservatives approach women getting abortions, and them being free of blame while they want to give life sentences to the abortion doctors. That just doesn't make sense. But it's all built on simping, and a lot of them are just these old men, or in their 40s, who maybe have a daughter, and now they view the whole world for the prism of being a girl dad. And now we suffer through the consequences of that by them not realizing that there's a decline in good women and in good men in our society. And I think, when you see a lot of the men just becoming unambitious and just wanting to play video games and stuff, I think they maybe see what happened with their parents. They saw a failed marriage. They saw their unhappy dad. They saw this is sucks. They see the women around them, and they're like, I don't want to give up my life for this. I want to maintain freedom. And I want to just sit and play video games, or just not be involved by trying to build up my whole life to have a family, man, when that dream could end up with me losing any cool things about me, and I have a miserable life. And so they stick to, they maybe don't want to be, aspire to the good man ideal that the conservative Inc. wants them to be. And so I think we need to really fix that question of making men want to be family men, and wanting them to be the providers and provide the next generation. And that really will solve a lot of the issues that goes with fertility rate, family formation, and etc. But you have to figure out how we can get men to want to be family men and to have that commitment. and blaming it all on video games or dating apps or social media or just men being losers is not the answer to that. I do want to make one final point, but I forgot this, but I need to make this point. Whenever they talk about this, and this comes in liberal media too, whenever they talk about dating or status and like how there are not enough good men, they just talk about like, oh, he's just not making enough money or he's not ambitious. He just doesn't really have set goals. It's like, I don't really know. Women do not really approach men like this. Like sometimes if they're talking, maybe if they're in a dating relationship or they're like thinking back like, oh, I can't get a shit together. Maybe that'll be a cause for a breakup. But the initial like reasons like women get in a relationship is like pure like animal much more basic and physical, or a relationship is just like something like, oh, he's like really funny and I really enjoy spending time with him, or something else. And if you have to think about this, like going back to the single mom with 2 kids, like her husband or ex-husband was a drug addict. And you always have to think is like whenever you're talking about like women like desiring, like they want like a man who's like a full-on provider, who's like got his shit together and all that. The amount of women who date drug addicts, and the fact that like you rarely meet a drug addict who's an incel, I think it's like against the laws of nature for a heroin addict to be an incel. Like if women can sense that a dude is a heroin addict, they'll be like crawling to get their heroin addict boyfriend. It's just the way things work. It's very weird. It's like anytime you like have a heroin addict boyfriend, they're like, that guy definitely has at least one girlfriend. And women, if they're like talking about their standards, like they're like, oh, he's just not ambitious enough. But then like tons of women are like, yeah, he's still on heroin. Yeah, he's still stealing my money. Yeah, he's causing a wedge between me and my family, but I love him anyway. It's like, they're thinking about all the type of like shitbags that they do date. It's like, whenever they talk about like the standards of who they think with men and who they actually date and who these women just like fall for, it's complete opposite of stated preference. Stated versus revealed preferences are much out of line here when it comes to women in this stuff. And it's the same with men. It's not like men rarely do this. It's rarely with men. It's like, oh, she's really ambitious, got her career together and stuff. And like, I'm really into that and stuff. It's all with men. It's just all like looks, personality. That's it. It's like how needy she is, how crazy she is, how good looking she is, other assets. That's like stuff like that. But with like men, for women, they just have to pretend that they're like in a business relationship, and like how they're dealing and operating is just like purely on like a checklist. And like women really like to pretend this, and like that's what all these liberal and write-ups or just media write-ups of this decline of good men have been for years and years and years. For as long as I've been an adult, they've always like approached it from that issue when stated preferences versus revealed preferences are very much out of line with what these women are saying and writing about in these articles. So that's just one final thought I wanted to have before moving on to the cognitive elite questions. And we're now going to move on to the cognitive elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highlyrespected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there if you haven't already. And this first question comes from Kevin. He asks, Scott, what do you think about the NBA endorsing or coming out and opposing the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision? Isn't it insane how all these big companies and sports leagues are coming out and making a political statement about this? And that's a good question. I tweeted about this with the NBA. Sent out a ridiculous statement saying we oppose the Supreme Court's decision and overturning Roe v. Wade, and we support women having the right to abortion. And they basically came out as like the NBA stated preference and policy is that we are pro-abortion. And this is a contentious political issue. Like this is like close to 50% of the public have positions on this, or at least when it comes pro-life to pro-choice. When it comes to actually keeping abortion legal in most cases, it's like 60% to there's a lot of people who are like don't know, so it's more in the 30s for who say it should be illegal in most cases, which is most of the pro-life movement. Anyway, it's a contentious political issue that you would think that sports leagues that are trying to appeal to the widest audience as possible do not want to wade into. They do not want to give their position on, especially, and it's a very contentious issue that both sides are very angry about. But they went into it anyway and did this. And it's going back to my, sports sim mode. I mean, it's like, well, there's couple things to think about here. One, it is expected for all these corporations to make these left-wing statements. It's been the case for ever since Trump became president. They all had to deliver like anti-Trump statements. They all had to be pro-George Floyd. They all have to have Pride Month events. They all have to declare that their particular sport is gay. And it's just part of this, that they any left-wing issue, they have to align with and say, we fully support 100%. And they never do this with any conservative issue. And if any player, coach, or figure associated with the sport delivers any type of conservative message, they're going to punish them. As seen with Jack Del Rio, Washington Commanders defense coordinator, who was fined $100,000 for simply calling out the Black Lives Matter riots and comparing it to the January 6th protests. And so they're not going to tolerate that. Meanwhile, the league the NBA can come out and fully state that we're pro-abortion, and that's that. And I always make the reason why they do this is because they don't respect conservatives as consumers, but they have no reason to, because conservatives will aggressively support their product no matter what. You can see this from Twitter on every daily basis. Like when you talk about sports and you're like, maybe you should stop watching this particular league. Maybe you should make them pay a price. All these guys will come out and like, hey, loser, hey, found the guy who got picked last in kickball. I'm going to watch the sports. I'm going to watch Black Lives Matter. I'm going to watch ESPN. But I oppose this stuff, but it's cool because I'm watching sports. Oh yeah, love watching ESPN and them doing a Black Power show where they're talking about how evil whites are. All right, sports guy, here I come. This is the downside of Barstool Sports or Barstool conservatives, is that these idiots will watch sports no matter what. The NBA could come out before every game and attention all white fans, we encourage you to castrate yourselves. And these guys are like, what? Well, I might not do that, but I'm going to continue watching the game. I got to buy a new jersey. And then they will still continue watching the game no matter what. So these people have no reason to respect conservatives. They know that they can ignore their opinions. They had worries about standing for the national anthem, but after George Floyd, they no longer cared about that, and they had all the players participating in protests and taking knees during the national anthem and just not coming out for it. They no longer have to care about conservatives voting with their feet or showing their displeasure with what the NFL and the NBA and the other pro sports leagues do. They're going to continue watching and supporting the league no matter what, and they will be very aggressive about it and attack people who tell them to do otherwise. So there's no reason for these leagues to even cater to their interests. Why would they? The left is actually going to make them pay a price if they do something the left doesn't like. Conservatives, instead, are going to continue watching the sport and loudly saying that they're going to continue watching the sport no matter what the league does. So there's no reason for the league to change their ways and change the way they operate. And so that's just how it is all the time. And this goes back to another point that I wanted to make. I think I didn't make this point earlier about the normies with both conceptions of this with the right, is that there's a feeling that whatever the online right or people on Twitter are saying is representative or indicative of how the ordinary Republican voter or the normie is, and this is what they really care about. And at the same time, I think there's some erroneous views on that. There's also the view that normies are inherently good and we need to really celebrate them and pretend we're like them, and we need to idolize the normies as the correct and right path. I have to actually differentiate. The average Republican is different from what you would see as a normie or NPC. I would think of it like an NPC person as somebody who's not really that interested in politics. An average Republican, I would say, is a Fox News viewer, talk radio listener. They probably do take a little bit more interest in the news and politics than maybe you would think for the average young person. So I would say that that's a little bit different. But we'll say with the normie NPC person, which really the grill Americans, as some people on Twitter like to call them, and the idolization of them. And I think that this is wrong to idolize them. Like, I don't think you want to be total misanthrope and like our elitist is like these people are cattle, and that. But at times you're not wrong for thinking that they are cattle. Like these people are easily led into believing anything, and they, and as long as they have their shepherd coat, pinning them into their going them into the pen, like telling them like, time to support Black Lives Matter. They're like, okay, as long as we can watch the ball game. Time to be pro-abortion. Okay, as long as we can watch the ball game. Time to talk about how awesome gay pride parades. Like, as long as we get to watch the ball game. And that's how like normies are. Like normies don't think they're like not like somebody to idolize. It's not like to hate them. They are what they are. This is how like most people have been throughout history and time. This is just how the nature of it is. And maybe some ways we're like in part of that and looking at ourselves. But you really have to think like, you don't want to conform to them or to conform to what you think they're like. You want to guide them into a better path, to guide them to a healthier state of mind than they currently are, where the system and the regime is able to manipulate them and persuade them into adopting and supporting a whole series of stupid causes. And they will support these series of stupid causes because that's what they'll do. And I think that some people really idolize these types as being secretly based, as like secretly cool, and like we need to be more like them. And it's like, we're too extremely online. We need to touch grass and be more like normal people. And then you see the normal people, and it's like a fat ass in an oversized jersey, grilling with his like ugly family, and he's like whole concern, and he's like listening to rap music, and his whole concerns is about some football team and like strangers who probably hate him. And you're like, no, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that person. I don't think we should idolize that person as that guy really gets it, unlike the extremely online right. So maybe I want to make this point. This may be a conflict between what I'm saying with the extremely online right and what they think the ordinary Republicans are saying, the ordinary Republican base is. And there's a conflict for that. And I am saying that they're, I am in previous comments, I may have been saying that what the ordinary Republican base is right, which is not 100% correct, but you do have to understand what they're like in order to have political success. And that's even for normies. But at the same time, and this is the general point, you shouldn't idolize these people and think that they're secretly base and you need to imitate their behavior. And there's like a bunch of guys on not, it's not just right-wing Twitter, like even left-wing Twitter gets into like idolizing grill Americans, like, yeah, I'm watching football and stuff. And it's like some weirdo dude with his gender pronouns, like they, them guy, who's like watching like football and pretending he's like one of the guys now. And I was like, no, you're not. Like, and that's like it for a lot of people. There's no need for you to pretend you're a normie. You're not a normie. By being really heavily invested into politics, you're probably a little bit abnormal. You're different. You're not going to be like a total normie who's just like happy with that the game is on and this is what their whole life is around. Like you're gonna be a little bit different, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you shouldn't see them as like superior to you and what you should try to imitate. You should try to, or we should at least try to attain positions of power in our society where we're now able to guide those people into better paths and better way of thinking, and to ensure that the sports leagues are not issuing left-wing declarations anytime there's some public issue arises because they know conservatives will never punish them. And really, if conservatives want this to change, they really need to stop imitating the NPC cattle and actually do something about this and make these leagues pay a price. And that's simply what all I'm saying. I'm not like attacking the idea of sports ball or the idea of bread and circuses. We're always going to have bread and circuses. We're always going to have those type of entertainments to take our mind off our daily troubles. But, at some point you have to say, this is too much. I want to make them pay a price instead of being a loyal, docile consumer. So that's it for the first Cognitive question. Now we're going to have a second one, and it's from our good European friend, Julien. I could never pronounce his name, but I think I'm getting close to it by saying it's Julien. It's French pronunciation, so it's not Julien, it's not Julien, it's Julien. And he has a question, and then he has interesting takes on the national rallies, big election victory last week, and what that means, and he has some thoughts on that. But we'll first read the question. It's a personal question he asked. And it's for his question is like, you mentioned that you were already right wing before entering college. What was your political evolution like in middle and high school? And did you have a particular red pilling moment? I don't know. I've always just been aware of these things as like a young kid. Like I always recognized race and thought that it was like weird how America approached this, even when I was in elementary school. And it continued on into middle and high school. But kids like don't really have serious or well-developed beliefs until like they're in college or their early 20s. And so I was like bouncing back and forth, and I was like reading a bunch of stuff that became big on the alt-right even well before it was like big on the alt-right. Like I was aware of like Julius Evola, Spengler, the French New Right, the European New Right, Nietzsche, all these thinkers like in high school. But I thought I was like literally the only person in America into this stuff. And sure enough, I probably was. But there was a few other people in America that stuff. There wasn't that like much you could find on what we would now call the dissident right back then. And the mainstream right was just all neoconservative, George W. Bush style stuff. And I, of course, didn't like that. But I was like a kid. So it's like you're not really serious about your political views then. I would say the real thing is like I didn't really necessarily have a red pilling moment. It's just things that I understood at an early age, and it's more just like coming to terms with that and fleshing that out and really becoming to a well-defined position rather than like any particular moment. One thing is like I got really into this stuff when I was in college. Like I had always had like vague political, but it was never really well formed because at the time it's hard to find a dissident right outlook. But oddly enough, as soon as this website started, it really solidified my political views. And that, of course, was the old alternativeright.com. I'm sure a lot of people here do not remember that time. I think a lot of people here got into this in 2016 or even after 2016. But this was Richard Spencer's Ventures. It was started in early 2010, and I stumbled upon it, I think, through a metal forum, and I got into that. I was already in college then. I think I was in my freshman year in spring of 2010. And I was actually learning, it's like, oh, wow, there's actually other people into this stuff. And even at its first iteration, it was not that radical. It was more paleo-conservative, paleo-libertarian. When I was first starting to read it, and it had major figures who were writing under their own name with a whole background to them and stuff. Like I think Paul Godfrey was writing for their first for the website in its first month, and so were there some other conservative intellectuals who had published books and were featured in Modern Age and Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and there were not nobodies who were interacting with this website, but it declined over time due to Spencer not able to keep up with any projects. So I would say like getting into that website really solidified and cemented what my politics were and made me want to more fully engage in it. And I did that when I was at a young age. So I would say that's like the closest thing to a red pilling moment. But I was already aware of this stuff prior to college. But even like some of my college experiences, solidified that because when you're like 18 or 19, your politics can be all over the place. You can be very like anti-authoritarian and just like really hate like the stupid conservatives that are represented by George W. Bush and stuff. But there are some things that really fundamentally change you. And I was getting a lot of anti-white lectures and stuff when I was in some of my freshman year sociology classes. I remember there was like the Sociology 101 where I was there and the teacher was talking about how racism can only be practiced by white people because it's like power plus power. You have to have power and privilege to actually engage in it. Like blacks just simply hate it, and that's not racism because they don't have the power to enact it. I remember people being really upset about that in the class. And there's just like other stuff that they're showing. Like they had like some video on like the dangers of having kids play with dolls that are assigned to their gender. And I was like, this is stupid. And then I had another sociology class where there was a woman who actually did work with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she just like made up stuff the whole time about like how millionaires are funding skinhead gangs to go and attack minorities. And also she was like claiming that all these white kids, like white boys and men are easy targets for serial killers. And it's like, What? That's like not even true of like the serial killers who were like Dahmer was primarily attacking non-whites. And it's like just like ridiculous stuff like this. Like the left is pretty loony, and I don't really like this anti-white stuff. I immediately knew that this anti-white stuff was like immediately stupid, and I don't like the blame for it. There's another thing in the sociology class where they made us read this story about some black guy in Chicago who kidnapped and raped some woman and then murdered her. And the whole story was talking about how it's not really his fault, that he was driven to this by the social structures around him, and he just didn't really know better. And there's like, the story was like he's like driving this woman around, she's like pleading for his life, and he's like, oh man, I didn't realize I could let her go. And he did something terrible to her. So even then I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't agree with this at all. So that's like all part of closest thing to red pilling. But I was already aware of this stuff even into at an earlier age. So that's my answer to that. Now I'm going to read his takeaways from what's going on from the national rally, formerly known as the National Front election, and what it should mean. He had a couple white pills. So here are his notable white pills that Julian wanted to share with us. First, the national rally won around 40% of the runoffs, which is unprecedented. Before, what would typically happen is that every other party would coalesce against them and voters would follow. This is known as the Republican Front, very visible in the 2002 presidential election, where Le Pen, Jean-Marie Le Pen, not Marine Le Pen, won basically no new votes in the second round. This did not happen all this time around. There are even cases where they started out only second and won thanks to votes that were not only from the right, but even from the center against the far left, and sometimes from the far left against the center in some white pro regions. This is actually huge. 2. Mélenchon's far left coalition looks like it will dissolve. 2 of the parties within it already stated that they would form their own parliamentary group, meaning the National Rally will technically be the largest opposition party in parliament. 3. Some of the elected congressmen are really goofy and keyed, includes a guy who owns a base bookstore and is a based housekeeper. And so there it is. Some black pills. Within the party, this is seen as a victory of the populist wing on the over the identitary wing. I think that's what he meant. Represented by the President Jordan Bardella. I fear that the ideological consensus will only get worse from here, especially given that Bardella has reportedly broken up with Le Pen's other niece. I guess Le Pen's got a lot of nieces involved in politics, because Mariam Marshall is Le Pen is her other niece, who went on to support Zemmour. This is especially unfortunate as the victory is partially the result of Zemmour campaigning for these ideas. They did best when Zemmour did best, and not too well in their historical strongholds where Zemmour was weaker, and acting as a lightning rod for media attacks. For sociological and ideological and economic reasons, I do not see them capable of taking over the remnants of the right, which I think will mostly be satellised by Macron. I think the best bet for reconquest, I'm not going to try to pronounce the French name of this is Zemmour's party, at this point is actually to become an alt-Republican party that can offer identitarianism plus center-rightism to the upper middle class, but that's going to be a rough transformation. And he has another thought. Additional interesting fact I just learned about the RN National Rally is apparently very short on potential candidates for congressional staff, unsurprisingly. So they're apparently looking to recruit heavily from the Zemmour youth movement, which tends to be much more educated. I honestly don't really think this will influence the party all that much, but the fact that dozens of young, smart, and motivated and generally based guys will get some useful professional experience and good contacts is a good thing, in my opinion. So that is that. We love our takes from Europe, our dispatches from Europe, from Julian, our friend. So we hope to see more in the future, and also more great cognitive League questions from our other highly esteemed, highly respected fans. And you too can get this power if you sign up for there, but make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. So that is it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're of course going to have another incredible, outstanding IQ supplement later this week. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.